I thought that I would also mention in closing here a couple of dramatic conversions in more recent times of men who were Jewish and embraced later the fullness of the Catholic faith. And one of them was in the 1800s, Maria Alphonse Ratisbonne. Alphonse Ratisbonne. He was a Jewish man, and so later he embraced the Catholic faith. He became a priest, and he went back to Jerusalem, and that's where he lived his life zealously speaking of Christ to his people, like a more modern-day St. Paul. And then in our own contemporary time, a man that I traveled to the Holy Land with was Roy Schoeman. And he has a couple of books, one titled Salvation is from the Jews, and the other, more recent, Honey from the Rock, 16 Jews Find the Sweetness of Christ. And he had grown up in New York City of conservative Jewish parents who had fled Nazi Germany. He received his Jewish education from some of the most prominent rabbis in contemporary America. In fact, he studied with a prominent Hasidic rabbi in Israel for several months. And he was very successful. He was appointed to the faculty of the Harvard Business School, but he experienced Christ visiting him. And here's what he wrote. Despite worldly success, my life felt irrelevant, meaningless. When I suffered some reverses in both my professional and personal life, I hit bottom. It was at that point that the Lord gave me perhaps the greatest grace of my life. While walking on an empty beach, it seemed like I fell into heaven. I directly felt God's presence and his love. I knew that he existed, that from the first moment of my life he loved me and watched over me, and that every event which happened in my life was exactly the best thing which could possibly happen. I knew that everything I did, for good or for bad, mattered and weighed in the scales. I knew that we lived forever. I knew that heaven existed. I knew about the angelic hierarchy. I knew that this was not the picture of God that I had had from the Old Testament. I prayed to know the name of my Lord and Master, my God. And then listen to these words. I prayed, let me know your name. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become a Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan. I don't mind if you are Christian and I have to become a Hindu, as long as you are not Christ and I have to become a Christian. So that became the consuming thing in his life. I knew the meaning and purpose of my life was to worship and serve my God. I knew that when I died, that I would regret two things: every hour I wasted in the eyes of heaven, and all the energy I wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment I was held in a sea of love without knowing it. But I had no idea of who he was, of what religion this was, or how to worship him. And it was later that Mary appeared to him in a dream, and she offered to answer his questions. When I woke, I knew that the initial meeting had been with Christ and that I was a Christian. And eventually he ended up in the Catholic faith and is now one who goes around. In fact, he's having a conference now in St. Louis together with Father Mitch Pacwa and other speakers in which he's going to speak about his conversion and other things. So conversion is part of the history of the church. It is something that continues even in our own day, that Christ enters into our lives. And he wants to enter into every life to lead us in the ways of life and of love. Let us pray today for those who still persecute Christ and his body, the church here on earth. And let us pray that we too may grow in a deepening conversion, that we may more and more reflect the light of Christ to the world.